So the camera's on you, your special power is to be silent. That's amazing. I'm gonna keep a camera on you all day because you are not silent unless I ask you a question on camera.
Right?
Okay, so what is today? It's a big day. What's a big day? What are we doing today? In general, just everywhere. The last show, which means we have to say a whole lot of thank yous, right? Because what did you learn from this show? You didn't learn anything?
I don't know.
What did you tell me about this show as we've been doing it for like 2.5 or 3 or 10 years or whatever? Right? You told me that you were famous. You told me that everybody loved you. And you told me that you were the talent and I'm just the background. Those weren't the words you used because you're not there yet, but it's essentially the message I got. So you need to say thank you to everybody for making you so famous. This isn't my first time on TV, so look at them. Tell them thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, tell them you appreciate it. Thank all the people who gave you costumes. Say it out loud to the camera.
Thank you, everybody.
For the costumes.
For the costumes.
Okay. And you've actually learned some stuff through this, right? Like, if I asked you what the biscuit method is, you could more or less tell me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need to hit ourselves in the face with fake shields. Okay, so this is our last show for a while. I'm not going to say it's our last one, because I still like to cook and I like to share what I know, but the constant up and down of all of this is proving to be a little tricky, so we're going to take a little break for a while. We're going to go into full-on summer here soon, so hopefully these boys will get a little bit of a break from all the schoolwork and all the craziness. I'm going to start teaching them a lot about chores and doing those every day. Yeah, if you're going to be Captain America, you can do some chores. Yeah, I think you can. You're fine. So, go ahead, you can say your line if you want. Your eye is fine, buddy.
Avengers assemble!
Oh, you put your shield in the air. Okay. Anyway, we'll have to teach him about all these characters who he pretended to be and knows nothing about. Stand up, Captain America. Come on. All right. So, big last show. It's also your brother's birthday, right? So we've seen my birthday, your birthday, and his birthday all in the course of this show. Isn't that crazy? Right. So we're going to make a birthday cake today. Now, the recipe you have is obviously in grams. If you want to convert it, feel free. But the reason I love this recipe is it is extremely simple. Cake recipes have kind of a notoriety for being tricky, difficult, complex, and honestly, they don't need to be. As long as we get everything in there and it is emulsified, then we're good to go. Now, the trick that I've adopted in the last couple years is I make it in a food processor. This is obviously something you don't see very often. It is not the standard way to make a cake, but I love it because it shears or cuts everything into itself very, very beautifully, and it emulsifies very quickly without a huge amount of friction. Plus, it's in a completely contained unit, so I don't have to worry about stuff getting all over my counter if I pour it in a certain way. You're fine, Captain America. Stop touching your face. Okay, now, in my food processor, fitted with a blade. The standard blade is fine. If you have a serrated blade, that's fine. If you have a whipping blade, you can try it. They're usually a little flatter, but it's just a standard setup, right? There's nothing special about this food processor over others. I have all of my ingredients: flour, sugar, baking powder, salt, eggs. We are using shortening for the cake, and we'll come back to that in a second, and milk, and of course, vanilla extract. You can use other extracts, other seasonings, anything you want. We are using shortening today, which traditionally I say any fat, because shortening is 100% fat, whereas other fats are not. And it is semi-solid, which means that it will melt a little slower in the oven. If you wanted to use an oil, you certainly could. If you want to use butter, you can, but you will get less emulsification because there's less fat to emulsify. So, you can blend it the same, it just may not look the same. What do I mean when I say this needs to be emulsified? I mean it needs to be completely uniform in texture, and it will be almost moussey by the time we put it into the pan. That's great for us because it means that everything is fully blended and completely uniform. If we put it in before that, we'll still bake something sweet and delicious and probably tender, but it's not going to be as tall or as tender as if we fully emulsified it. So today I'm using all-purpose flour. You can of course use cake flour if you would like. You can use all-purpose flour. You can go all the way up into bread flour, but just remember, the higher the protein, the more stiff it will become. So keep that in mind. A lot of times when I make stacked or shaped cakes, I will go up into bread flour so that they hold their shape as we go. But then I have periodically received comments that the cakes are a little tougher than people had expected. Where you going, Captain America? Okay, see you later. We are going to blend this up. It's real simple. Everything is in here, and we turn it on high. Don't be afraid to help your machine. We're blending. We can also, as we are blending, we can scrape everything. I like to take a peek through my slot where I can add dried goods, right? Get a good scrape there. As you can see, we have a batter, but it's not emulsified yet. We haven't really completely incorporated the fat. It's in there, but even as I look at it, this is glossy and it's a little grainy. What I want is for it to be shiny and completely smooth. So we're gonna blend it, blend it, blend it. It's a little loud, but we're gonna try and knock out our jokes while we're blending it. What do you think, Captain America? I'll lean on it to see if it muffles it a little bit. What happened to your nose? Is it your mask? Yeah, okay. Why don't you tell us our joke?
Why the way butt goes on the feet of my cake?
What?
Why do we put candles on the top of the
Yeah, you did do it. I guess we'll wait a minute. So this is the exhilarating part. We're just mixing. But by using the food processor, I've left my stand mixer available so I can go ahead and make my frosting. This is a standard frosting that I've used making the marshmallow fluff and then adding butter to it so it's completely smooth, there's no chance of graininess, and it has the subtle taste of marshmallows. You like marshmallows? Yeah. Almost. About one more minute. So, what do you think, Captain America? You gonna dance? Keep going. Alright, don't jump on that. Alright, so my batter is fully emulsified. One of the signatures of that is that when I stop it, there should be an air bubble that pops all the way to the surface. When that pops, it should leave an imprint of where it popped. That lets me know that my batter is a fully formed batter and not just a bunch of ingredients that are almost mixed. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And a couple of them already popped.
Yep, and see I've got a couple more bubbles rising up. That's completely normal. This thing doesn't pump in a ton of air, but it does incorporate air as it blends. Air is definitely not a bad thing when we think about cakes because it will help give us some height and it'll keep everything really nice and tender as we go. So the food processor is one of my favorite tricks for the perfect cake. Now, as we look forward, here's another trick for how I make cakes. I do not like tube-shaped pans if I can avoid them because they take forever to bake. Some of you are like, what's a tube-shaped pan? It's the standard cake pan that you have in your drawers, right? You may have an 8-inch, a 9-inch, a 10-inch. Goodness knows I have all kinds of sizes. Wedding cake bakeries have every size you can imagine, but those cakes take forever to bake. So, since I don't do a ton of cakes that are so large I need a specialty pan, I actually bake them on regular sheet trays, right? So what I'm going to do here,
Sheet pans.
a sheet pan, sheet tray, yes sir. So this full recipe,
Whatever you want to call it.
whatever you want to call it, this full recipe is just barely too much for a half sheet pan. So I will put about 3/5 in here. It's a little more than half. And the reason I say that is because we're fully emulsified. We've got that beautiful baking powder in there. It will rise, it will stay in the pan, but it'll start to kind of muffin top on the pan, and it becomes real tricky to get back out of there. Now, if you happen to have a deeper pan that is about this size, or professionally we have what are called sheet pan extenders, It's like a little frame that we can put in here and the cake will rise up. It's perfect. But if we put 3/5 in, we'll drop it to pop any air bubbles that are forming. Right now it is about, don't actually touch it, it is about halfway up the side of the pan. For what's left, I have a 1/4 sheet tray, and this bakes up pretty much perfectly. So this recipe will give you a 1/2 sheet tray and a 1/4 sheet tray. Now, if you are at home and you don't have either of these things, but you have like a jelly roll pan or pans from the grocery store or something else, there's nothing wrong with that. Go with some trial and error, but of course I always endorse getting the right stuff for the right job. So get on Amazon and order these pans, because what we're going to talk about next is these pans also give us a nice little leg up when it comes to stacking our cake. Now, because this is a fat-based cake, it will more or less auto-level in the oven as the sugars melt and the fats melt and everything kind of coagulates together. So I don't have to spend a ton of time leveling it and making sure it's perfect. I do want to make sure that it's close, so I give it a little shake, I let it settle. We will bake these in a 350 Fahrenheit oven, and I like to go with a still oven on these cakes because I want them to rise nice and slowly. Especially if you're using cake flour, this is when I absolutely advise against using convection if it's an option. Because what happens is, if you use convection, it forces air so fast that your cake will rise to this level and the outside will set on the metal, and then the cake has no choice but to rise up and you get that huge muffin top. Now with these, we have less of a side for the heat to transfer to, but I still want to use a still oven because it'll rise really nice and evenly. I still want to periodically check them. When this is done, it will be just like every other cake. It will be firm but springy, and it will definitely smell delicious. I want just a hint of color on the top. So this is where we go golden brown delicious. If you were to add food color to this cake, or you wanted to add a little cocoa powder, which is absolutely fine, you can test it with a skewer. Insert a skewer, remove it, it'll be good to go. Now, I'm gonna throw these in the oven. We're gonna pull a little magic of TV, and I'll show you what comes next. Now, while we're doing that, why don't you tell them the joke they couldn't hear?
Why do we put candles on top of a birthday cake?
Why do we put candles on top of a birthday cake? I don't know. Why do we put candles on top of a birthday cake?
Because it's too hard to put them on the bottom.
Oh, we can't put them on the bottom. That's funny. That's funny, huh? Good job, Captain America.
And I got another one.
Well, let's hold off on the other one for a second, okay? I can tell you really want to tell it. Go for it, bud. Go ahead.
Which cakes do baseball players like the most?
Which cakes do baseball players like the most? Home run cakes.
No.
Is that a thing?
No.
You think I would know that, don't you? Just what's the punchline? Come on.
Bunt cakes.
Bunt cakes. Oh, that makes sense because baseball players like to bunt sometimes, right?
Wait, what's a bunt?
A bunt. We'll just ask your grandfather. He'll explain it to you in very extensive detail, okay? So, because we had our food processor make our cake, our stand mixer is ready to go. If you couldn't hear me, I'll briefly touch on this again. This is my marshmallow fluff recipe that is then fortified with butter. You can also use shortening or other dairy-free alternatives, but this ensures that I don't have any of that starchy sugar quality that sometimes accompanies American-style buttercreams. And
American?
yes, American, good job. And it gives me a whole lot of flavor options. Whatever I can do with a marshmallow, I can flavor this buttercream and it will be smooth as silk. Now, if you are super averse to corn syrup, you don't have to use this recipe. Use any frosting you like. Of course, you can use ganache, frosting, Italian meringue, whipped cream, whatever. The key is what comes next. This is how I and many bakeries can do things so quickly, but a lot of times we have a lot more storage than you have at home, so what really comes out of this is having the foresight to know what you're gonna do. So, magic of TV, we've baked our cake. I have it frozen, and what it is it's in a beautiful layer right here, right? Why did I freeze it? Because it will make what comes next so much easier. It's unreal. We're gonna give this a quick re-whip, just to make sure it's uniform. Smells good, looks good. Always leave that on the side in case we need it. What's up, Captain America?
Just watching you do the stuff.
Just watching me do the stuff? That's good, buddy. Now, I have a bunch of these mousse rings. You've heard me reference them throughout the show, but now here's what here's what it looks like. This is a 6-inch by 3-inch mousse ring. This is another reason I hate tube pans. I have these, I put tin foil on the bottom, and suddenly I can bake the cake immediately in there. Yes, Captain America.
Why is it called a mousse ring?
Because a lot of times this is how we mold mousse for eating. Dessert mousse, not the animal. You haven't had a lot of exposure to mousse, the dessert, okay? So, I have mousse rings in all kinds of sizes, and if you've seen my Instagram or you've seen anything about mirror cakes, this is a lot of the ways that we mold them. As we mold them in this, we take them out, and this way it is perfectly flat. I could mold this cake in this ring if I wanted to with buttercream. It just takes a little more advanced preparation. It's kind of a lot more than I want to get into today. But if suddenly you lost all of your cake pans, I would fully endorse just get a whole series of mousse rings. You're good to go. They can also stack inside of each other. Yes?
How do you know what size of a tray you need to make the cake?
Because this is a half sheet tray. I know what all the sizes of the trays are. That's what they're called. This is a half sheet tray. The ones in the oven is a 1/2 and 1/4. A full-size sheet tray is the big ones that you see me use sometimes. But most home ovens can't hold a full-size sheet tray. Make sense? Okay. So the cake we're making today is a 6-inch cake. So guess what? I have a 6-inch ring. I have my frozen cake, and almost like a giant cookie cutter, I just come through and I cut it. I cut it. This cake isn't fully frozen, but it could be. If I were to freeze it overnight, it would make this even easier. And suddenly I have a lot of beautiful layers. Now, one of the cool tricks about baking in a sheet pan or sheet tray is it is almost exactly 1 inch tall. So that means if I'm worried about the height of a cake, I can say, oh, I need this many layers of cake, and then I will know, oh, I only need this many layers of buttercream or frosting, and then I can go from there. It's also nice because if you think, oh, 1 inch isn't very much, 1 inch is a pretty substantial layer of cake. Like, that's a good enough layer of cake for just about anybody. So, we have our cake board, we have our cake. I can tell I'm losing Captain America. He's bored out of his mind learning all this. Unlock your cake board. There's no need to hit yourself, silly boy. Right? And so what comes next is we simply pull our cake off. When it's fully frozen, it's a so. Yep, you are definitely dancing. When the cake is fully frozen, it's so much easier to get off of here, but it's totally fine. So we cut and cut and cut.
Until it rips.
Sometimes, right?
Okay.
And then we move it to the cake board. Make sure it stays round. We can go ahead and get the other ones off too. Now, what do we do with all of these little edge or trim pieces? Those are for tasting to make sure that your cake is good.
Can I taste?
Yep, kind of figured that was coming. Or this is what you turn into cake pops later on. So Captain America, you're supposed to be taste testing. How does it taste?
Good.
Good? Okay.
I mean, great.
Oh, great. Well, I do love the upgrade from good to great, that's for sure. So if we go ahead and get all of our pieces already portioned and set aside so we can use them, it makes what comes next so much easier. But I like this because if and when I have a space, or especially when I worked in hotels, somebody would inevitably show up and say, oh my gosh, I forgot today was my anniversary or somebody's birthday or whatever. I need a cake super turbo, but I don't just want one off the shelf. I want it made fresh. I want it a little bit custom. And I'd be like, no problem, we got you. Because we would have tons of this cake baked perfectly, sitting in the freezer, ready to be defrosted and stacked with very fresh buttercream. Now your buttercream can also be frozen way ahead of time because there's almost nothing in it that can spoil. And if you thaw it and re-whip it properly, it will be the exact same as if you did it fresh. So really and truly, you can have this cake in your freezer at all times as long as you've stored it properly and you've got the space, and then you can bust out a cake in almost no time. The next layer goes on. We take this, and you see it's just constantly going, go ahead, Captain America, take one that's already been cut, please. This is why you don't work with people with crabby fingers. There's a very consistent theme in the pastry kitchen, and it's an argument that will rage on forever, where every time the pastry chef or pastry cooks make something, the savory cooks show up and start snagging it, I can't tell you how many times I've had to make dozens of extra cookies because suddenly the savory cook showed up and they were like, oh, but there were cookies out. And I was like, yeah, but we needed those. And they were like, well, you should have made extra. And I was like, you should have kept your hands off them. And it's a battle that'll never end, right? But you see, it's just rinse and repeat. It's easy, easy, easy. My cakes that are in the oven are getting close, I can already tell, because it's so thin and the surface area is so much that they bake pretty quickly, which means that it's very rare for them to dry out also. So you're more likely to get a moist, even bake on your cakes because they are thinner, and you can stack them and use them more easily. So, there we have 4 layers of cake, 3 layers of buttercream, my standard kind of European structure there. It looks delicious. I told you this is a 3-inch tall ring. This is a 3-inch tall cake. That's a lot of cake. That's enough, Captain America. You're not gonna be able to fit in your suit if you keep it up. Right? Peek at my cakes, they look good. Not quite there yet, but then we have this. Now, if you are in a super hurry or if you're not, of course we can go ahead and frost the sides. If it's easier for you, you can go ahead and throw this back in the freezer. If your layers are fully frozen ahead of time, let it sit for about 3 or 4 minutes. It will freeze all of the buttercream in between because we're sandwiching it between frozen cake layers. And then your cake is even more stable, so it's harder to smash it as we start doing our final frosting on it. So, Captain America, anything else you want to say while everybody just watches me finish up this cake? Nothing? You said you wanted to give some shout outs, right?
I know it, but I don't know who to shout out to.
Well, what about your friends who watch? Let's start there. Your friends, your teachers, doctors, nurses, law enforcement, the woman behind the camera, your mom who's made all this happen. What do you think? Nothing? No respect for mom? That makes sense. Right? So the woman behind the camera, for those of you who don't know, she sources most of our jokes. Because of course, once I became a dad, all I had was dad jokes. Blaze tries to make up jokes. They are not good, so we don't let most of those make it to the camera. And she does a lot of our research and stuff like that. She writes most of the menu because after so many years, I'm kind of chefy. So while she stays behind the camera, we want to say a big thank you to her. Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom, for giving us the platform to do this and making sure that we do it. One more reason that there's a lot of work that goes into this little thing, and we're glad that you guys enjoyed it for as long as you have, right? So we come back into our cake. We have one nice thin layer. We'll get another nice thin layer here in a second. All of this comes down to practice.
Taste test?
No, we do not taste test the full cake. Once it's a full cake, we send it out the door, right, bud? One of the hardest lessons that we've learned throughout all of this is Blaze is constantly saying, ooh, hey, what you got there? And I'm like, oh, you know, it's just a cake for a friend or a customer or whatever. And he'll say, well, I'm a customer. And I'll say, okay, let me see your money. And he goes, well, I don't have any money. And I'm like, well, then I don't think you're a customer, bud. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just I'm so hungry.
Yeah, I don't think you are so hungry. Now, if we're going for kind of a, stand up straight, please. If we're going for more of a wedding style ribbon cake finish, we just spin, 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 go up the sides.
Spin, 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 spin.
Right, once we get to the top, we can take these off real quick. Now, one of the keys that they teach you in pastry school is that if you want a flat top and you're just icing as usual, go all the way across your cake. A lot of people just go into the middle, and if you only go into the middle, you're inevitably going to get a dome. So when you scrape, scrape all the way across, all the way across,
All the way across.
all the way across. And then what we will do is we can put a little spiral on top, finish the aesthetic. That's that.
I mean, this kind of spiral.
Careful, bud. Don't fall off your chair. Clean up your board. If this is your final board, give it a nice clean wipe. If it is not, freeze your cake before you transfer it. I can't say that enough. It's really disastrous if you try to pick up your cake and it completely disintegrates. But that is our birthday cake. Super, super easy.
And you can make any design that you want on it.
Yes, once you have it frosted, you can do just about anything you want with it. There's a very good chance I'm going to top this cake with fondant. That's why I'm not super concerned about the buttercream underneath. I will go back and make sure that it is nice and level and straight. But as long as we're here, we chill it down to make sure it's set. But that is our cake. That's it. That's why cakes are so much faster in the professional kitchen, because we have the foresight and the planning and the space where we can do it just like that. We hope everybody stays safe. We appreciate you guys joining us as you have. We hope that you stay baking and healthy and awesome. There's a good chance we'll duck back in from time to time, so please keep following the page. I know a lot of you found out who I am and what we do from this series, so we appreciate that. We still have a lot of diapers and everything else to buy, so thank you all so much for your business. And this little guy eats so much cake. Yeah, not this cake. So, thank you, and we will see you again throughout the summer. Bye, guys.
Bye.